It's 6 p.m. on Wednesday here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Hwang Ji-hye. And these are the top stories we're following at this hour. South Korea expresses regret over the North's comments, slamming President Park Geun-hye's speech at the UN and threatening to cancel war-separated family reunions. Foreign affairs heads from Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo meet on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly and agree on strong countermeasures against any future provocations from Pyongyang. And controversy flares in the domestic political arena over a set of election rule agreements seemingly reached by rival party leaders over the Chuseok holiday. We look at some of the key issues involved. President Park Geun-hye's speech to the UN General Assembly this week was widely well received by global leaders, but North Korea was far from impressed, threatening to cancel the upcoming reunions for war-separated families. South Korea urges the North not to turn back on humanitarian issues. Kim Hyun-bin has our top story.
South Korea's Unification Ministry on Wednesday voiced regret at Pyongyang's threat to cancel the planned separated families reunion and called on the North not to back out on already agreed humanitarian issues.
The South Korean government urges the North to stop denouncing and criticizing President Park's UN speech and comply with the high-level talks agreed to in August. Pyongyang should not turn away from humanitarian issues like the separated families reunion, threatening it for political and military means.
North Korea slammed President Park Geun-hye for her speech this week at the United Nations, in which she warned Pyongyang about the consequences of further provocations. North Korea's committee in charge of inter-Korean relations said President Park has spewed out thoughtless words that attack Korea's own people and set the two Koreas at odds on the global stage. The committee claimed the speech ruined North-South relations when they were just beginning to thaw. It went on to say that President Park's speech, in the name of peace, reflected her ambition to reunify the Koreas by absorbing the North into the South with the help of foreign countries. It also said the South Korean leader had jeopardized planned reunions for families separated by the Korean War. The meetings are scheduled to be held at North Korea's Mount Keungang Resort from October 20th to the 26th. Meanwhile, President Park said on Monday that Seoul would fully support North Korea in developing its economy and improving the quality of life of its people if the regime abandons its nuclear program. The two Koreas made a landmark agreement last month to hold high-level inter-Korean talks in Seoul or Pyongyang as soon as possible. But experts say this too looks murky as the atmosphere turns hostile on the peninsula. On top of North Korea's possible launch of a long-range rocket to coincide the 70th anniversary of the founding of its ruling Workers' Party. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, top diplomats from Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo warn North Korea against launching a provocation, stressing such a move would trigger stronger sanction against the regime. The united front comes as speculation mounts Pyongyang will launch a rocket next month to mark a key political anniversary. Hwang Ji-hye has more.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se met with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts, John Kerry and Fumio Kishida, on Tuesday to reaffirm their stance that any provocative action from Pyongyang will further isolate the communist state from the international community. The three stressed any violation of a UN Security Council resolution will incur further significant measures, which would include both economic and diplomatic sanctions, and that the Security Council has begun working-level studies into reviewing measures that will be stronger than before and much more detrimental to the North.
There will be stronger sanctions on top of the current ones. These will be based on what kind of hostile action North Korea takes. If the North launches a provocation, members of the UN Security Council and other related countries will start discussing the measures.
Ahead of its ruling party's 70th anniversary on October 10th, Pyongyang has been threatening to push forward with a rocket launch that is, quote, aimed at putting satellites into orbit. But UN Security Council resolutions ban such attempts as they're more likely covers for testing long-range missiles. The three sides also share some common ground that Japan's exercise of its collective self-defense should be carried out in a transparent manner that respects South Korea's sovereignty. Tokyo recently passed new security legislation allowing its self-defense forces to fight overseas in the name of aiding allies, which, in the event of war with North Korea, could enable Japanese forces to enter the Korean peninsula in the name of helping the U.S. 송지선, Arirang News.
After a series of meetings at the United Nations in New York, President Park Geun-hye is back in Seoul. Much of her trip focused on warning North Korea against fresh provocations and pledging an expanded South Korean role in the global push for sustainable development. Hwang Ji-hye reports.
After wrapping up her 4-day stay in New York, President Park Geun-hye arrived in Seoul on Wednesday. The main event of her trip was attending the 70th UN General Assembly. There, she used her keynote speech as an opportunity to sway North Korea from making further provocations. Her trip came amid Pyongyang's nuclear threats and speculation of a possible long-range rocket launch next month.
북한이 과감하게 핵을 포기하고 개방과 협력의 길로 나온다면 대한민국은 국제사회와 힘을 모아 북한이 경제를 개발하고 주민들의 삶의 질을 향상시킬 수 있도록 적극 지원할 것입니다.
She stressed the importance of reunification, saying it would ultimately lead to a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. Much of President Park's trip was also spent introducing the so-called Semaul movement, an initiative that led the modernization of South Korea's rural economy in the 1970s.
By adapting to the distinct needs of countries and to the changing times, the Semaul 운동 can become a strategy for rural development globally and for progress nationally.
As part of her agenda, President Park pledged to expand South Korea's role in global efforts for sustainable development, starting with a donation of $200 million over the next 5 years to ensure a better life for girls growing up in developing countries. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye and her Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin exchanged messages on Wednesday to celebrate 25 years of diplomatic ties. President Park said the relationship that started in 1990 is a mutually beneficial and future-oriented one, while Putin said the partnership on regional and international issues would help build peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. Park also expressed hope in creating more synergy from Korea's Eurasia Initiative and Russia's Far East Development Plan. President Park's Eurasia Initiative, proposed in 2013, aims to boost the regional economy through free trade and economic cooperation in the Eurasian bloc with a Trans-Siberian Railway project plan that links Europe through the two Koreas. Turning to local politics, despite an unexpected agreement among rival party leaders over the Chuseok holiday, infighting continues over plans to change election rules. Kim Young-gil has more.
Saenuri Party chief Kim Moo-sung said Wednesday that he did not give in to the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy demand to introduce a survey-like open primary system in choosing election candidates.
We drew up necessary measures to minimize the side effects of the US-style open primary system. The agreement I made with the opposition chief could be scrapped or be made better. I did not accept the opposition's proposal. It's a completely new plan.
However, ruling party lawmakers loyal to President Park Geun-hye oppose Kim's push for open primaries, saying it's an attempt to widen his political clout. They say a nomination system based on secure numbers was never discussed within the ruling party. Secure numbers are meant to replace the actual mobile phone numbers of participants for telephone polling and the candidate selection process. The main opposition MPAD called for the ruling party's support of the bipartisan agreement.
I cannot understand why some ruling party lawmakers are making irrelevant remarks. I hope the National Assembly Special Committee on Political Reform will start drawing up bills to implement the system.
Moon urged the ruling party to continue discussions over introducing a new proportional representation system and creating guidelines for rezoning constituencies. However, the MPD's minority faction lawmakers also opposed the agreement, saying it fails to clarify what an open primary based on a secured number is. Meanwhile, the presidential office Cheongwade says it is concerned about the parties adopting a nomination system using secured numbers, as it could distort public sentiment. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
And now more about this nomination system based on secured numbers, about how it works and what are the controversies surrounding it. We turn to our Park Ji-won.
The leaders of Korea's main rebel parties agreed during the Chuseok holiday that the two parties will adopt a candidate nomination system for next year's general elections that's similar to a U.S. open primary system, but which has also supplemented the weakness of the system. A so-called secured number open primary means participants, both party members and non-party members, can vote for a candidate of their own choice through mobile phone polling, the number of which is concealed during the voting process. For the candidate selection system to work, Korea's mobile service carriers like SKT and KT need to cooperate with the parties to conceal a voter's phone number. The system is known to be free from any manipulation as the number samples are randomly chosen, free from any privacy concerns of participants, and also reduce costs for the nomination process compared to polling at actual polling stations. However, controversy remains over whether the system is safe from all possible problems. The president's office expressed concerns the system could distort the public's intentions. The president's office said phone polling is fundamentally different from the real, actual voting process. It added the system cannot guarantee fair voting and is open to possible manipulation. The president's office also said the system could actually increase rather than reduce costs for the candidate selection process, making it a waste of public money. Korea's Minor Justice Party and those in the opposition bloc aiming to create a new party in coming months also expressed opposition to the system, saying it will only favor candidates with an existing public awareness. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Bleak growth projections from a number of economic institutes suggest that Korea's slowing expansion may persist for the time being. But at least one of the explanations behind this lackluster performance says the country is simply taking its course. Shin Se-min reports.
A report compiled by economists at Oxford University indicates that Korea is the second best equipped among 13 emerging markets to ride out a crisis following the Philippines should the global economy significantly worsen. But when it comes to economic growth, the country is likely in for a bumpy ride. According to the same report, Korea's GDP will expand the least behind Brazil and Russia this year, casting dark skies over its economy. Deepening concerns over the health of the Chinese economy that have been rattling emerging markets are especially more worrisome to Beijing's largest trade beneficiary, Korea. But already, multiple economic organizations have laid out bleak forecasts that the economy will grow less than 3%, brushing aside the government projection of 3.1%. Moody's Credit Rating Institute predicts a 2.5% growth, while Korea Economic Research Institute revised down its outlook to 2.4% this month. Experts say the stagnant growth, however, is a result of Korea's greater economic scale.
With the size of the Korean economy growing to resemble that of advanced countries, it is natural that growth slows.
Already, Korea is nearly on par with advanced countries in terms of foreign currency reserves, debt, and foreign assets, but in order to avoid the low growth trap, experts say it needs to find a breakthrough. Facing a growing disparity in growth outlooks between private institutes and the Korean government, market watchers are now turning to the Bank of Korea's upcoming forecast next month, with many anticipating a downgrade from the current 2.8%. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And if you're watching us in Korea, you'd better have your wallet at the ready. America's retail phenomenon known as Black Friday has reached Korea's shores. Thousands of stores will be slashing prices by up to 70% for the country's own version from Thursday. The government hopes Korea's biggest ever sales event will boost consumer spending and make up for the country's slowing exports and slow growth. Unlike the U.S., Black Friday sales will run for 2 weeks until October 14th. Around 26,000 stores are taking part, including local markets, department stores, and online shopping malls. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. More updates coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time, so stay tuned and goodbye for now.